To build our dream house, what we need is a plan. We need a blueprint from world-leading experts, from those who have been there, done that experience, and know exactly what it takes to make your dream house a reality. And the same thing goes for achieving elite human performance in any endeavor, from athleticism to general career. Welcome to the Elite Athlete Blueprint podcast, the podcast that will give you all of the tools that you need to make sure that you can learn from the absolute best wisdom available on the topic of elite performance and spend the next 10 years putting in the 10,000 hours of work you need to achieve elite athletic performance. Okay, so hopefully we're in for a relatively brief one today, but we just wanted to talk on the topic of the ideal training week. Now, chances are you've sort of listened to some of the other interviews that we've done, the other podcast episodes, and got a bit of a clue as to what I'm going to be talking about here. But I just wanted to give a really nice, concise summary of how I like to talk about the ideal training week. If you sort of do the 6 pillars of athletic performance episode and read through that, then you'll sort of understand, some of the important factors that we need to consider, such as, how we're adapting from the training that we're doing and sort of what level of an athlete are we. And to contextualize that concept of what level of an athlete are we need to think in terms of how long have we been training for and how much stress are we placing on our body every time we train. And the longer we have been training, the more stress we're placing on our body, and therefore the more recovery we're going to need. However, really to talk about this concept of the ideal training week, the most important thing, the most fundamental thing that I can say to anyone that's going through the Elite Athlete Blueprint, and anyone for that matter who has a desire to be the best athlete that they can be. I'm going to talk in the context of a basketball player here, because this is obviously a basketball specific podcast and a basketball specific program. However, just know that whenever I say the word basketball, the concept obviously applies to not only any athletic endeavor, but any particular endeavor that any human being is good at. And the reason I say that is because, as human beings, we have this ability and this capacity to sort of adapt to anything. And that's why, we are the top of the food chain, because our brain has evolved so much that we genuinely can adapt to any particular activity. And the reason why I say, you copying what any human is good at, well, because, human beings are not born great at a particular activity. Human beings are worked into being great at that activity. They adapt into being great at that activity. And, it can be quite a concept that causes a lot of controversy and doubt in a lot of people. However, if you look into the literature about it and you read any number of books, you'll see one thing I talk about a lot is the 10,000 hour theory, and you'll see tons of information on the 10,000 hour theory, suggesting that if you invest 10,000 hours into an activity, then you are basically guaranteed to be an expert at that activity. And there are some caveats within that, you can't just invest 10,000 hours just doing the same thing. You have to be very deliberate with your practice. So I think the concept should be more investing 10,000 hours of deliberate practice into that activity. Then, the evidence does suggest that by investing that much time into any one activity, deliberately investing that much time into deliberate practice. And deliberate practice, I have a guide that is in the Elite Athlete Blueprint that you can look through to see what defines that. And you can also sort of Google the concept, but it really is just diligent, hard practice, focusing on your weakest areas for really a maximum of sort of like 3 hours a day is what you can get benefit from without needing to recover from it, depending on how neurologically taxing the skill is. Skills that are more neurologically taxing are things that require a lot more muscle mass, and force, I should say, such as jumping and playing basketball. and those that don't require as much force, which would be, dribbling, which actually does require a bit of neurological force because of the fact that you have to bounce the ball really hard to be an elite dribbler. And then shooting, jump shooting, and free throw shooting is probably one of the lower, if not the lowest form of neurologically taxing skill that we can do, because you're not jumping and you're not leaving the ground, so you're producing a lot less force. And essentially, you can, any free throw shooting that you do, you can't really overshoot. Like, you can sort of get a bit of forearm overuse or forearm tiredness that will linger. And a lot of people might be thinking, what are you talking about, forearm tiredness? But if you try to practice every single day and shoot every single day, then you'll know what I'm talking about. So this is where we need to be creative about our training week and understanding. Sometimes we need to train through fatigue when we're going through patches, such as in the off season or in the preseason when we're preparing. But we need to understand, are we training through fatigue all the time? And I think this is where a lot of players are sitting. They're feeling, and the easiest way to know if you're fatigued is, are you losing motivation to train? Does training feel like a grind? And do you feel sort of sluggish and just kind of half-assed when you're training? And if the answer is yes to any of those things, then chances are you sort of need to reevaluate your training routine and have periods where you undulate. Okay, and undulation means basically, you're going to maybe do 1 or 2 weeks where you're training like that, but then you take time to do less activity, still following the guide of doing something every day. You do less activity, but you kind of just work on the minimum amount to produce a result so that you can get a maximum amount of recovery. And there's a concept in sort of strength and conditioning, which is sort of the adaptive threshold. And a lot of people underestimate, just how little work it takes to create an adaptation, whether it's skill or strength or anything like that. Essentially, anything that we practice regularly is a skill and something that we can improve at. And when we look at the strength and conditioning, the adaptive threshold in certain cases could be only 1 or 2 sets of an exercise, whereas most people commonly do. If someone goes to the gym and they don't know what they're doing, they'll just go until absolute failure and cook themselves, and they get to a stage of fatigue, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to adapt anymore. It just means they're going to over-fatigue their system, and then over time the gains that they aggregate aren't going to be as great as someone who's very smart about the amount of volume that they do, and they just do the minimum amount needed to cause an adaptation, and they go back and recover. Now, an example of someone that does this amazingly well is Steph Curry. And if you watch any of the GQ sports series on his training from his trainer, it seems like his training is perfectly calculated to a level, and no one's going to nail this 100%. This is the thing. I think it's just a concept to work with and keep in mind. If you don't feel great when training and you notice your gains are kind of plateauing, and chances are you probably, and if you're doing a lot, you're doing a bit too much, and you need to sort of dial back your training or think more creatively. And this is why we're here as coaches, to find the optimal amount for you. Sounds like for Kobe Bryant, the optimal amount for him was 6 hours a day, for 6 months straight. And the optimal amount for other people might be 30 to 40 minutes a day. But the fundamental concept underlying all of this is that we want to be doing something every single day. And that really is the ideal training week. There's a concept within sort of what that training should be. When I say something every single day, I mean something related to basketball every single day. Now, when I say training, it doesn't just have to be actually getting out and getting a ball in your hand. For certain athletes, they might benefit from only doing sort of 4 to 5 days a week of actual basketball work and then taking 2 days off. But in those 2 days off, they don't have to stop doing basketball altogether. They can maybe get out and work on some smaller skill sets if they feel like they need to improve their dribbling or their left-hand finishing or something like that. But in the other time that they have on those 2 days off, they can really focus in on watching film and going through mental rehearsal and mental practice and sort of understanding the intricacies of the game. And this is an area where The best players in the world excel. Any NBA player, you ask them, or if you ask any professional basketball player, how much film do they watch? They'll probably tell you they watch at least 2 hours a day. From all reports, Kobe Bryant was sort of obsessed with watching film and would spend several hours every day watching on the plane, and he knew every one of his opponents and all of the way that they would move and everything like that. But it's not just simply the act of watching it. What we know from studies in neuroscience and understanding the human brain is that when we watch film, we have what is called a mirror neuron going at play to cause adaptations within our body. So when we activate this mirror neuron, what we're doing is like the brain is able to see movement being done by another person, even better if it's ourselves, and it's able to mirror that movement within our motor cortex and further cement the pattern and the pathway of movement that we're watching. So in other words, by watching someone performing a skill such as jump shooting, our brain partially doesn't know the difference between us actually getting out and practicing that movement and watching it in front of us. So in order of like what the brain doesn't know the difference between, obviously the biggest activity that's going to have the biggest impact on our skill is the actual act of shooting itself. If we take shooting, for example. And then, in between that, in the middle, we look at, okay, well, if shooting is the most impactful, then we can see from research that mental rehearsal is the second most impactful. Now, in certain research, it was suggested that the group who practiced only mentally in free throw shooting was able to experience 80% of the improvements that the shooting group experienced. And I have talked about this example before, but just stop and think about that for a second. They didn't touch a ball, and this was over, I think, like a 10-week period or something like that. The group didn't touch a ball at all. All they did was practice shooting free throws mentally. They visualized themselves there, and the time it would have taken them to actually shoot, say, 100 free throws in person probably would have taken, let's say 10 minutes or 20 minutes. You got to wait for the ball to come back to you, and you got to get your routine set, and you got to shoot it. Whereas if you're just practicing mentally, it probably only took them 5 minutes because they're not waiting for the ball to come back to them. The ball's not going around. Someone's not rebounding for them. They can just focus to the point where they set themselves and then feel the movement happening. And so that is absolutely massive when you think about it. And not enough people know how to really apply this. I think most people just don't trust the fact that mental improvement or mental rehearsal is going to get them better. And I know I'm guilty of this myself. I still question it, even though I know the data and I know the fact that when you practice mentally and practice mentally rehearsing, it actually feels like you're out there playing. You get this feeling like if you are a shooter or a basketball player or a golfer or any particular skill, when you imagine yourself doing that thing, you kind of notice that your eyes drift off in one direction. And it actually feels like you're doing that thing. And that is really what mental rehearsal is doing. Our brain doesn't know the difference between mentally practicing and actually practicing it to an extent. And so we can sort of ascertain from the research that it's about 80% of the difference or 80% of the result. And that's massive because it doesn't take the neurological complexity and neurological demands of not actually getting out and practicing is significantly decreased. We can only practice for a certain amount of time each day with needing to recover. And really, the amount of time that we can practice for basketball, realistically, is probably only like 1 or 2 hours. Whereas you can mentally practice for 3-4 hours, depending on what you're working on. And you only really need, in terms of the law of diminishing returns, like if you're a great shooter, you only really need to mentally practice 100 to 200 shots to sort of maintain where you're at and continue improving. And that can be done in like 10 minutes. And then you can spend the rest of your mental practice time sort of watching film and running through your sets in the game and practicing how to react to certain situations and replaying the game in your head. If you listen to any audios from LeBron James or any great athlete for that matter, and you listen to how focused they are, what they have in common is that they talk about seeing the game in their head, and they can accurately recount every single play that happened in big games to a very granular detail. And if you've listened to any of the Calm app that has LeBron James meditating, you'll notice his supreme amount of focus. And I think I was listening to a YouTube interview with LeBron where they were talking about how great he was at remembering all of the finer details of the game. It's because in his head he's played through basically every scenario that could be possibly played through in terms of the game of basketball, and he knows his opponent's tendencies and everything like that. And it's because he spent that time mentally rehearsing, he spent that time watching the games, and that really is the thing that separates elite players from not so elite players. The amount of time they invest in activities that don't tax them or tax their body neurologically while also improving their skill sets. So they've got the skills, and then they can also have the athleticism, and they allow themselves the optimal time to recover, because most athletes, for a really hard training session, it sort of takes 48 to 72 hours to recover from it. And most athletes are probably going to just be sitting in this like moderate intensity zone of training where they're getting out, they're playing, a few pickup games, and they kind of go and play. Maybe if you're really into basketball, you're playing 5 or 6 times a week, especially younger kids, like they're getting out and training hard. If you're in a state team, you might even be training twice a day some days. And that's kind of the message that's talked about in America. Get out, train 2 a days, and you want to do that all the time. And I'm not saying there's not a place for that. And if you are trying to make rep teams and trying to improve your basketball skills and trying to really get used to playing in a system, then maybe that is what needs to be done for a period of, say, 3 to 4 months. You can't do that all year round. And this is where the concept of sort of the off-season versus the in-season comes in. And if you do that all year round, you're not going to develop athletically. You're basically just going to develop your tactics, your skills, and even your skills might suffer if you're not doing it optimally. And sure, you're going to become a better basketball player. But the real question is, this is how the elite athlete blueprint teaches you to think and how the elite athletes should think. The real question is, how much better could you have gotten if you had have properly structured and sort of periodized your training? And that's what we really are aiming to teach through this whole thing. And we can definitely show you exactly how to do that based on your season, kind of your current level of skill, and sort of piece everything together. I think this is the one thing that most athletes miss. They miss the long-term planning piece, and they miss how to piece everything together. They might be getting great information from a great coach, yet it's great for Steph Curry, but it's not great for the kid who's been playing for 3 years and simply just needs to get out there and work on his fundamentals and work on dribbling, for example. So really that sort of sets the scene and underlies why and where I talk about this concept of the perfect training week, and why the prescription for the perfect training week in my mind is probably less than what a lot of elite athlete programs would be recommending, and guys like Drew Hanlon and really prominent skill trainers would be recommending. And I think the stuff that Drew Hanlon talks about has a place, and I think whenever someone talks about the grind, doing 2 or 3 sessions a day, they're usually talking about the off-season period. This is a period where an athlete's finished the season, they've had sort of 1 or 2 weeks of time off, and they need to really hone in on particular skills, and then they have a certain amount of time with that skill trainer for a period of a couple of months. And this is where guys like Brad Beal and Zach Levine and guys that work with Drew and other trainers really make massive gains in the game, skill-wise. But they're already great athletes, and they've already been working on their athleticism throughout the whole period, and they're obviously going to be working with a trainer in that time as well. And so what we need to do is keep in mind, okay, what are they doing throughout the rest of the year? So they might be doing 3 days in that off-season period, but they're probably going to have, say after they finished, they're going to have a week off before the training camp, then they go to the NBA, and then they're going to be doing NBA training camp, and then they're in the season. So what they kind of do is, it's a concept of undulation. They go from And there's a concept in training, which I'll sort of talk about in the physical preparation piece, where you have two sort of variables in your training. You've got intensity and you've got volume. Intensity is basically how hard are you working, and volume is how much you work. And so you can't really do intense work that's intense. I've got my bunny ear quotes up there, but intense work would be considered activity that's 8 out of 10 taxing, or 8 out of 10 taxing on the neurological system. And things that are 8 out of 10 taxing on the neurological system is basically like when you're putting 100% effort into something. So if you're a weightlifter, lifting it sort of 75 to 80% plus of your 1 rep max on any particular activity, or basically jumping as hard as you can or close to as hard as you can, is going to be very intense activity. And then you've obviously got sort of running and playing activities where you say, geez, I'm 8 out of 10 cooked. Like if you're as cooked as you can be, then you're talking like running a marathon or running cross country or something like that. That's 10 out of 10. But anything sort of below 8 out of 10, I guess could be sustained for longer than, say, 10 to 30 minutes. Like even NBA players, they're not 8 out of 10 all the time in a game. And so that sort of is the intensity variable. And intensity leads to fatigue very quickly, and a certain type of fatigue. It's more neurological fatigue. Whereas volume, on the other hand, is lower intensity activity that allows us to get repetitions in. So this is your skill work. This is stuff that goes for longer than 30 minutes and that you can sustain it for longer than 30 minutes. This is more aerobically driven, got more oxygen involved, less anaerobic, less sprint work. In the gym, it's sort of your 3 sets of 10 and plus, using weights that you can lift for sort of greater than, I guess, like 6 to 8 reps, would be considered sort of your volume work. And this is in strength and conditioning concept, but it really applies to anything, whether it's skill work or playing. And what you want to do is, in your training year, you want to go through periods, like typically in the off season, you want to make it a lot of volume, because volume is needed to build the base, build the capacity, build your tissue strength, build your oxidative capacity, build your ability to use oxygen, circulate nutrients, and create adaptations for the body. Whereas intensity is better for allowing yourself to maximize sort of the base that you've got and allowing your body to produce as much force as possible. And really the best way to sort of describe the difference, like volume is building the house. Intensity is refining the house, renovating the kitchen, putting in the cool lounge room, putting in the cinema. You can't, so if you want to make a mansion and you're starting out with nothing, and you need to have events regularly, this is somewhat of an analogy, but and you need to have people coming over regularly, then, okay, how do you build the mansion over time? Well, you need to accumulate the money and to run it. And so, you want to start out with an event, and you don't have a house, but you need an event in a month. Well, okay, how much of the house can we build in a month? Okay, let's spend 3 weeks building the house, and let's go. All right, we've got a sweet living room and a dining room. Cool. House is built. Now we need to spend another week sort of decking out that dining room, painting it, refining it. Then we have an event. Okay, that event's done, and this sort of the event represents your playing season. All right, let's build it back. What have we got next year? All right, let's put in some volume. Let's put in 3 weeks of volume. We got to build. Okay, now we're going to add some bedrooms, entertainment room. All right, 3 weeks volume, and then another week. All right, let's deck it out. And I guess if you applied that to the training year, you can see, like, when you're not playing and you're not trying to run an event, you want to accumulate volume till you get to a stage where you're happy with sort of where you're at, and all you need to do now is just sort of refine the house and continue decking it out. So, most players really don't focus on building the house that they've got. They don't both focus on building the athletic base that they've got. Most players aren't blessed with a full house. They're not blessed with athletic ability and really great aerobic capacity or skills or anything like that. So they need to invest a lot more time in the volume side of things in their first stages of their career. And a good rule of thumb is sort of like, if you haven't been regularly sort of playing sport and building a volume base for like 10 years, and this is skills, this is sort of longer term work, and this applies to weight training and elite sort of Olympic weightlifters, and that's where the concept comes from. But if you haven't really been putting in sort of 10 years of predominantly volume-based work, then you're simply just not going to have the house or the tissue capacity, the oxidative capacity, the ability to recover that you need to be able to get the most benefit that you can from training intensely, doing intense work. And obviously this is a bit of a rough analogy because there's so much that goes into it. But it's an analogy that works in terms of like, okay, building a house and having it over time. And who's going to have a better party? The person who simply just runs events in a house that they built just like haphazardly. It's got like a lounge room, and then they've kind of just tried to deck it out, but it's still not very good and it's falling apart. And they haven't really invested the time to continue building it. They've just been focusing on running events the whole time. Or the person who over 10 years has built this sweet mansion, and they've just been disciplined to not run events all the time, but they're just continuing to deck it out. Then obviously the person with the mansion is going to be winning that who's going to have the best event comp every single time. And that sort of is the concept of how you can optimize your volume versus how you can optimize your intensity. And the reason I talk about that is because it's really important to come up with your ideal training week. There is no ideal training week that's going to work every single week. You need to look at what stage you're in the season, what level of skill that you've got, and how, what are the things that you need to work on, and then how does it demand based on the teams you need to reach to be able to achieve the goals you want to achieve. Like if you need to reach state team, then, well, we need to be working you intensely because we need to make the most of what you've got. But if, you are happy to sort of not play state and really just aim for playing college by getting recruited at the end of your high school career, well, then we can focus on the long term. And this is sort of like one of the problems with college sports in America is that like a lot of people who play college sports, they don't focus on building the volume, and the college sports model really just focuses on intense competition. Whereas a guy like, the Europeans really do it well in terms of building the volume and just allowing people to play and train for training's sake and enjoy it. And so that is a really important consideration. And the reason why I spent so long on that to talk about the ideal training week is because if we don't consider the long-term picture, then our training will never ever be as optimal as it could be. And the biggest way to ensure that you're going to be successful in any endeavor is focus on the long term, understand what you need to do, find someone who's been where you want to go, which is us at the Sydney Supersonics and the coaches. And if we haven't played professionally at the level that you want to play at, then we'll find someone who has to give you the advice that you need. But we know from a theoretical standpoint exactly what needs to be done, and we've achieved some pretty great things as players as well. And so really investing in that long term will ensure that you're successful, because that way it takes the pressure off needing to go hard every single day, and you can go hard when your body's ready to go hard for it. Most people sort of think go hard or go home. Well, that's crap. You only need to go hard or go home on a few days of the week. And so it really depends on the stage that you're in. Now, to go back to the initial concept of the ideal training week, and to wrap things up, I sort of talked about, okay, well then, with all of that said, and all of those considerations in mind, it can become pretty complex to be like, man, what do I do? Where do I start then? Like, I don't know where I'm at. I don't have a coach. Like, I'm not near you guys, or I can't afford to work with you guys. What can I do? Well, the biggest thing that we can say is, obviously a coach is going to help, but the biggest thing we can say is, all right, well, great. Have a guess. Have a guess at where you're at. Have a guess at what you need to do. Find a player that you want to play like and see what they did at that age. And really just start to piece it together yourself. That's the whole purpose of this Elite Athlete Blueprint, is to allow you to become your own best coach and to piece together what you need to do to achieve success yourself. I think there's too many players who listen to what the national body of basketball talks about, Basketball Australia or Basketball New South Wales, and only does that. And I personally think it creates athletes who aren't creative, who don't shake the mold, who just simply follow a syllabus and curriculum, and they don't go outside of it. And sure, there are some players who do, but they're the ones who are their own coach and invest heavily in their own playing ability and development. Now, when we look at sort of going back to the own head coach model and what you need to do as a player, do something every single day. That is the biggest piece of advice we can give you. Second piece of advice is, if you're doing something every day and you're not feeling fatigued the next day, then do a little bit more. Identify the things that you need to work on. A good rule of thumb is sort of like, okay, I'm doing some kind of basketball every single day, and I need to work on the things that I'm not great at compared to the people that I want to be like. And a good sort of way to do that is, okay, well, look at what the best players in the world are doing, and then look at what the best players in the world for your age are doing, and then look at what the people around you are doing that you're playing with. Find out what they're good at, get as good as the people around you are at what they're doing and what you want to be like, and then use the greatest people in the world as your measuring stick for it. Now, I guess sort of round it up and finish it up. Sorry, I just had a little distraction there. As you can probably tell, I'm going for a little walk around. But to use that measuring stick, that'll serve as the way you can identify what you need to do, because it's going to be individual for every person based on the kind of player that they are, how athletic they are, and how tall they are, everything like that. A good sort of way to guide that even further is one of my favorite training routines or training schedules for the week, is having 5 days of total training with actual basketball work. 2 of those days is training at an intensity that replicates playing, and is really just doing things that are as close to basketball performance as possible. You can add a third in if you're sort of in a period where you really need to work on playing and particular skills, but I'd try to keep it at 2 for the most part for the longevity. And then on those 2 days, you want to include some form of weight training. So you want to include, that's why we recommend sort of the knees over toes program. You want to include the 2 lighter upper body days on those days as well, so that you're just getting in the volume. And then on the other 3 days a week, you do a 30 to 60 minute skill session before your weight training session, and then you do the lower body knees over toes sessions. Now, if you're finding that sort of those 5 days in the gym's too much, then it's perfectly fine to sort of only do 3 days a week, and you can split those up in the gym however you want. But the key is that you're doing sort of 5 days basketball specific stuff. You've got 2 days of playing intensity, and then 3 days of light skill work, working on your weaknesses and getting in the gym. Now, if it's a choice between going to the gym or playing basketball, then I'd absolutely say that you want to go to the gym maybe 1 or 2 days a week and do some light dribble work either at home or as a warm up in the car park or something like that. And then for the other 3 to 4 days, you want to go to the basketball court. And the good thing about the knees over toes program is that it can be portable. If you purchase some basic equipment, you can sort of do a lot of it at the court. So if in doubt, always go for more basketball specificity and do your best to get the gym work in. You still want to be in the gym because it is really important to load heavily on a couple of days a week. However, for most players, the basketball stuff really is going to be what takes you over the next level. And then, for the first sort of, look, let's say 5 to 10 years, you could be okay just playing and doing basic gym work and mastering your body weight and everything like that. And then when you get to that next level, sort of 10 years plus, well, that's where, okay, well, I'd say 5 years plus, you might really want to start looking at finding a gym that has a court at it as well, or getting a gym at home, or working out with someone who can work on both for you. But don't overcomplicate it. Like I think if you're just starting out and you're not training every single day, you're not doing something every single day, then start there. Now, as I talked about at the beginning, sort of begs the question, what about the other 2 days of the week? Well, those other 2 days of the week where you're not taking rest, really important to rest and make these days as light as possible if you are going to do some basketball stuff. But super important to rest, unless you're not feeling cooked, and then get out and have fun, go and play, do something that you want to do with your mates. But if you're finding that, okay, look, I'm really trying to invest in my basketball here, use those 2 days to rest, recover, work on some weak points such as offhand finishing and some of the more skill-focused dribbling work, such as the knees over toes, dribbling 2-ball drills that he proposes. But there's tons of drills in the Sonics Elite Athlete Blueprint as well. But the biggest thing you can do on those days is watch film, and I'd recommend watching at least an hour of film, whether it's watching a game and watching a particular player that you want to play like intently, or even better, sort of studying your opposition and finding game films of the games that you play. We're going to start trying to film every single game that we have for the Sydney Supersonics for all ages eventually. And if you can watch those games and start to look how you're playing and understand what the better players of your age do, the more you can understand what the people who are succeeding at your sport are doing, and the more you can understand what goes into playing well and moving well. And remember the mirror neuron concept. Every single minute you watch, you're going to inherently be working on your skill development anyway, and then you can just mentally rehearse the skills in your head. You should be able to do that for 1 or 2 hours a day, and it just starts somewhere by breaking it down. And I'd sort of probably recommend go 30-40 minutes of watching film, whether it's your own games or a player you want to play like. Really watch intently, notice some of the things they do. Write down like 1 or 2 notes of something you notice about something you'd like to incorporate into your game. Even better if you sort of screen capture the clips. You can use QuickTime Player and just Google how to make a screen capture on a Mac. And then you can start like saving a bank of clips. And then you'll have sort of 1 or 2 things to focus on for the week ahead. And then basically you spend 30-40 minutes doing that. And then the other 30-40 minutes, you can sort of freestyle, find whatever you want, and spend at least 20 minutes mentally rehearsing key skills such as jump shooting, dribbling, and free throw shooting. And then if you want to do a bonus 30 minutes, focus on sort of running through the sets that you're running in your team, and mentally rehearsing playing in a big game or playing with the teammates that you've got, and recognizing, okay, what is it that they do? Remember their tendencies. The more you can play through it in your head, this is what any great athlete will say. They've played through the movie of them winning the gold medal or winning a certain game hundreds and if not thousands of times. And you always want to play that movie. One of the greatest concepts of sports psychology, whether you're a swimmer or a basketball player or a rugby player, whatever. One of the most important concepts that we can do is sort of mentally rehearse and play through the clips of what we're doing in our head. And if you do all of those things, so you're in the gym sort of 3 days a week, you're playing intense basketball 2 days a week, you're mentally rehearsing, you're watching clips of the greatest players you're watching skill clips, watching your own games, and then you're getting in those 2 sort of maintenance sessions, and on those maintenance sessions also involve your stretching, then that will be the ideal training week for you, and I guarantee you that you will reach elite performance.